Jane,
Hi, Chris.
this is the first conversation I've done in someone else's house. So we're literally sitting in separate rooms right now because we're hanging out because we are actually
We've
friends.
been hanging out. We're friends. So, yeah, cool. There's my art above my bed. Okay.
I like it. Wait, I am recording, right? I am recording. I'm a little frazzled here right now. Okay, so I don't think you've watched any of these before. As I say to everyone at the beginning, I have a free Zoom. It's going to cut us off at 45 minutes. This is a
That
way to,
is such a great way to end shows. I mean,
yeah.
really.
It just
Brilliant.
doesn't waste anyone's time. So, also, I had wanted to interview you over the summer. Then you went on vacation, and then I got tied up with work. I stopped doing a lot of these. So I've written these questions a while ago, and I don't remember what I said, but I'm going to ask these questions to you now. And then we can just talk if we have extra time. How about that?
Okay, cool.
All right, Jane.
Yes,
You,
Chris.
you, you are the author of In Thrall, Don Juan in the Village, Real Estate, Leash, and probably several other books that I'm not
Some
familiar
do.
with. Huh?
Some do is my
Some
first
do.
novel.
Okay. Well, the point
That's the one
being,
Luca wants to make into a TV show.
Luca wants to make it into a TV
He
show?
supposedly was trying to sell it as a limited 6 or 8 part TV thing.
Well,
It said in
fingers
the
crossed.
yeah. Well, I don't think it's been working out very well, but anyway.
Well, the point being, you're a very accomplished author, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh, anytime for you, Chris.
Oh, thank you. You and I met several years ago via a mutual friend who we just mentioned, Luca. And this friend recommended I read your book, Leash, likely because they knew my sensibilities at the time. And on a purely visceral level, I'm going to guess that Leash is your most fucked up book, for lack of a better phrase.
For sure. And
Okay.
it actually, not only is it my most fucked, I've got to plug this in, is why, but it's just nothing I could write about sex in that way ever again.
I get it.
It's just done.
Well, it starts as this relatively mild interpersonal drama about restlessness, casual sex, and the thrill of power dynamics and BDSM. Though by the end of the book, we're in full-on body horror territory. I've since read some of your other work, most recently the reissue of In Thrall that came out this past year on Semiotext. And it seems to me that horror and other transgressive, I don't even know if that word is relevant anymore, but other transgressive subject matter is actually not the focus of your work at all. So I'm curious if you think you write in any sort of tradition or genre outside of literary fiction. I know your work has often been categorized as queer or lesbian, but I've heard you resist that classification. So what is the universe that the Jane Delynn novel exists in?
I'm not sure it exists in any really great universe for sales or anything. I guess I don't like classifying books by their subject matter.
Okay.
So that's why I resisted gay and stuff.
But you write literary fiction.
I write literary fiction, and from a kind of standard, I just think that I'm a really good writer, sentence by sentence, and my dialogue is very good. But
I agree.
I like books that I can read and not get bored reading. So I don't think my books are generally that you don't normally have to plow through them. I mean, I read all of Trollope's books, who wrote about 70 books, but they're very readable, and I've read many of them more than once. I mean, I love Virginia Woolf. I'm sort of more of a European sensibility, I think, and even in foreign books, maybe more French. The old French New Wave. Yeah, I get European writing better. I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah.
So let's just say you're the American equivalent of the European literary novelist.
Yes, that's very good. I'm not very interested in transgressive literature that has to do with sex and stuff, because I find it very repetitive, and I don't know. It's expressing a weird kind of negativity that I don't even know if people feel.
Yeah, I personally am trying to get away from this shit, but so this is why I'm talking to you. Let's talk about your book In Thrall, which was recently reissued by Semiotext. From what I understand, this novel was first published in 1982, and it takes place in the 60s, the period of your adolescence. As is referenced on the jacket, this is a pre-Stonewall era coming of age story about a teen girl named Lynn. She carries many of the qualities of the artistically inclined child, meaning she simultaneously thinks of herself as smarter and more wretched than most everyone around her. At the center of the story is Lynn's relationship to her teacher, Miss Maxfield, who she ends up having a kind of love affair with. But this is not really a grooming story, nor is it filled with salacious sex or other taboo subject matter outside the fact that Lynn is sleeping with her teacher and is into women. In 2025, neither of these things seem all that shocking. So the appeal of this novel is the humor and drama of it all. For example, Miss Maxfield assigns Lynn an essay on the theme of the tragic hero. Lynn chooses herself, saying, I am a tragic hero because of my tragic flaw and excess of intelligence that dooms me to unhappiness. By the end of the book, we are left with the subtle sadness of this failed relationship. All of the obvious conflicts come to a head. Lynn's parents find out she must graduate and go on to college, etc. But there's none of the hand wringing you might find in a contemporary novel, no moralizing on the nature of consent between a minor or adult, or anything like that, at least not to the extremes you might find today. So I'm curious, when you first released this book in the early 1980s, was this a controversial novel or was this welcomed into the world as a kind of intellectual piece of literary fiction? Or you tell me about its reception. Further, what was the catalyst for this re-release with Semiotext?
The catalyst, I think, was Hetty, who's the publisher, read it. Michael Silverblatt, the bookworm, had been telling him to. And I think the real catalyst was probably Colm Tóibín reading it and loving it so much and being willing to write a really, great intro. And no, it was not welcomed with open arms. It was mostly, completely ignored, which was kind of interesting because I'd gotten a ton of reviews for my first novel, Some Do, that was sort of dealt with what we might call feminist themes, although I don't, I try really not to advocate for anything in my fiction. I think it's just the most dated thing in the world is to start moralizing or whatever. I mean, that's good at the time, but I think, in fact, there were my friends who knew me, back then actually thought I really soft pedaled whatever pain and lasting consequences I got from the relationship, which was really more about age. At a certain point, I just became unable ever to come on to anybody younger than me. And I missed up some things then. And luckily, younger women, this is after maybe being my mid 40s or something. But anyway, no, it was not welcome. The best review was from somebody in the Washington Post who compared it to Catcher in the Rye and said it would have a long, long life. That sort of sustained me. I got a couple gay reviews, but they were negative.
What?
One,
Why?
Well, one was by this very fat author called Bertha Harris, who was sort of, well, it's relevant. I'm not just, bringing it up out of, sheer malice, although she was ugly also. That's malicious. But and what was funny about it, she was teaching at a college and she would have affairs with her young students. And she was complaining about that it was unrealistic for this teenage girl to be attracted to the teacher because you forgot to mention the teacher's in her upper 30s, twice the age, and not particularly physically attractive. In fact, I think it's the first page, maybe even the first paragraph, which mentions the teacher having perspiration stains under her arms when she lifts her, her arm above her head, and you can see. So it was not that kind of book. It wasn't meant to be salacious. it was quite autobiographical, but in a way that I think it is not memoir. It is not a summing up. I made a really strong point of that whatever the year it was set, say in the mid 60s, low to 60s, of forgetting everything I knew that happened in the world after that. So I think it's kind of valuable in a discussion of what it was like to be a teenager at that time, finding out about going through this stuff and not knowing. I mean, it can't be political because she had no idea that there would be gay lib or queer lib, let alone trans and stuff in the future. I mean, she thinks that God has afflicted her in this way and that she's Jewish, or so Jews don't have hell, but otherwise she might. It's not her fault. She thinks it's unfair, but she doesn't expect anything to ever happen to change that. And in a way, there's a tragic stuff for all of us. So almost all of us, and those who don't have it, you wish they would. So, but we all have our crosses to bear, right? And so I didn't want it to be one of these whining books, and I find actually all advocacy literature generally very, very boring, and it's all about power ultimately. Whoever gets to be the latest power, whether it's women, blacks, gays, trans now, I don't know what'll be next, but it just comes about getting a bigger piece of the pie, and I find that really uninteresting.
I more or less agree with you. So so given that was its reception, did it actually have a long life? Like, did it resurface as something that readers were attracted to prior to Semiotext picking it up? Or like how did it even land in Michael Silverblatt's hands before this republishing?
Because I was friends with Michael Silverblatt,
Ah,
and I met him just as that book came out. There was this bunch of West Coast writers that came to the East Coast, and they were there for my book party. And so he loved it, and that's how he got Hetty to read it. No, there was absolutely zero mention of it. A friend of mine, a writer called Jaime Manrique, uh, he was, I don't know, somehow he gets on with everybody, even the people that run the gay stuff. And they were making a list of the 100 best gay novels that were voted on, but each person was allowed to pick one that wasn't voted on, which was me, and he put In Thrall, which I thought was outrageous that Don Juan in the Village wasn't. But I never felt that part of. Actually, gay men like my books generally better than women do a lot of the time. I mean, or at least I would have like straight friends. The guy would read the book, maybe not the woman. So, and there's a lot of, I don't like political movements on the whole, and the gay movement had its own problems, and you know.
yeah, fair enough. Well, you've mentioned that In Thrall is the first book in a kind of trilogy. The second novel, I believe, is Don Juan in the Village, which I'm sorry, I still haven't read. But the
Thank
third,
you.
the third is Leash, which I mentioned earlier. It's been a while since I read Leash, but I remember this being a hilarious and horrifying book about BDSM pushed to its logical conclusions, one's desire to remove themselves from the obligations of free will. Bret Easton Ellis blurbed the book, writing, Leash is strong, compulsive, gripping reading, as morally complex as transgressive fiction gets. It goes places few, if any, books land, not only in terms of its arousing, sexually explicit candor, but also in its uncomfortable psychological honesty. In my head, In Thrall and Leash live in completely different literary universes. What ties them together in this trilogy you've written?
Well, I describe it as the great trilogy of the second half of the 20th century in the US, where I guess I call it queer lit, but I guess it's lesbian, which I'm contradicting myself, but you could classify it by this subject matter. And
Or
In Thrall is like the closet period when gays were just completely, you know, like it was, I think a quote of my father was like, and a real quote too, was like too disgusting to talk about. So it was kind of just, you know, I mean, women, they didn't talk about women at all, but, gay men would be arrested periodically and they would raid bars. They were all mafia bars. Um, and if you were caught with 3 or more pieces of clothing of the opposite sex, you could be put in jail for that. Um,
that's
and then,
true. In the 60s, that's true. Or
yeah,
50s, or I don't, that's
yes, it
amazing.
is true. The they always used to have people guarding gay bars until maybe well into the 70s. I mean, when gay lib came along. And so Don Juan in the Village is really a collection of stories uh, about either pickups or very, very short relationships. And it's the period of liberation when it's like so thrilling, and just the idea of it just makes sex so great. You're picking up somebody, you can go out in public and pick someone up and they want to sleep with you. It's like amazing. Not that it's set in the same, it's just set somewhere after gay lib at some point. And there's a bunch of stories that are self-contained, except there is one continuous narrator. And the narrator, I only realized this later, they're unnamed in the last 2 books of the trilogy, and they're the same personality. So I realized only later that I'd written a trilogy. But this is in, Don Juan in the Village is just like, it's about a Don Juan in the Village who's a woman. And then Leash is what I call uh, postmodern is the wrong word. It's sort of the disillusionment. There's like, it's like a revolution, and everyone's happy and then the killing starts. And so this is not killing, but it's the sort of co-option into straight culture and money, and the gay parade stopped being something that you felt gutsy about being in, because after all, your grandmother in St. Louis could see you on TV marching in a gay parade. And then it got the same kind of booth selling food that every other parade in New York City had. And it was just about dancing um and that's really probably fine, but in the stance of that universe, then it just became like all of capitalism, which is great if you're like capitalism. And although I love to benefit off capitalism, conceptually I'm not that fond of it. So, and if you're depressive anyway, it's easy to connect it with the loss of whatever hope there was in the gay movement of being something different. So she's just sick of life, the sick of, sounds silly to say sick of money, but just sick of commercialism and the kind of cool spots you're supposed to maybe go eat in, or the kind of furniture you're supposed to buy, or how all homes should have white walls and stuff. And she wants something, that she's living with someone, but she wants something of greater intensity. And so she does an ad thing. And one thing that I decided would really make it, that she never knows what the person she's with looks like. That's part of the conditions of the thing.
Oh,
And
right.
yeah, and I actually once thought I'll go to a brothel and see what it's like not to know what the person I'm with. So I told them ahead of time, but they showed me a book when I got there. So I didn't know who I was with. It's just not the same thing. I mean, I wanted it to kind of be like, she could be thinking, is this like a really old and ugly fat person? Is it someone beautiful? Is it a guy? Is it, whatever. So I wanted her not to know, to be kind of in this, kind of much more scary universe where if you don't And of course, she's not seeing the person because she's not seeing surroundings either. So she doesn't really know what's going on. And and I was going to sort of end it like the story of O, but I actually think I think I have one of the great endings of any book ever, to be honest with you.
It is
It's really unique.
phenomenally effective, I have to say. I don't know if we should probably not give it away for anyone who's
No,
interested.
no, no, you mustn't. But it's
Okay.
not predictable. Yeah, I was going to end it up actually not the story of O, but with her dying. But this is much better than that. This is a really cool ending. And so for me, pre-gay lib, post-gay lib, you know, and I don't have really much else to say about gay relationships or maybe any relationships.
So Semiotext published Leash back in the early 2000s, right? They
But
just
not
re
Hetty, different editor.
Oh, different editor. They've just re-released In Thrall. Is Don Juan in the Village going to be re-released in the same?
According to Hetty, they were going to re-release next fall uh, a combo of Don Juan in the Village and Leash. But, it really, they should have all been done together. It's kind of weird to do one and then the two, but I'll be happy if they do it. I'll be happy if I'm alive when it comes out. Who knows?
All right, well, let's keep you alive to the best of our abilities.
Well, I would be worrying about that even if I was
Okay,
30
okay.
years younger. But anyway, yeah.
Um, I have a general question that I just want to spit at you before moving on. As you are from a bit of an older generation than I am, I'd love to hear your thoughts regarding the changed and changing literary landscape. And maybe you can talk about this in terms of a career. From my perspective, especially when I was much younger, it seemed very cool and sexy to be a writer or artist. And I imagined this to be a kind of career trajectory that, while difficult, was at least possible. Now in 2025, as I approach my 40th year, actually, okay, I'm now 40, so this means I wrote this question a while ago. But as I'm now 40 years old and I have lived on this planet for as many years, I've encountered so few people who make a living writing novels or making anything the average person would consider art. It seems to be one's full-time job only as a byproduct of an inheritance or divorce settlement, meaning it is not a career at all. Am I wrong in assuming you come from a time where you could be a writer and also pay your mortgage, or has this never existed at all, save for a few people every generation, our Stephen Kings and J.K. Rowlings and whoever else ends up getting their work adapted into a tentpole franchise? I don't
Um,
even.
it was definitely, I mean, ever since I started publishing, I always heard how it used to be better. And I used to think that was bullshit. And they were doing this to keep the advances lower. But in fact, it was true. It was always better. It was better before TV, obviously.
Right.
People had to read books if they wanted, any long form entertainment, or they read stories in magazines. And but definitely more people could earn a living. And for one thing, I knew a lot of people who made a living kind of as a writer, but you weren't buying mortgages. You were like in rent control places in New York City that, until they got rid of rent control in like the 70s, you could live very cheaply in really shitty places in New York City because there was no impetus for the landlords to ever upgrade anything because they weren't getting any more money when they did it. So things just got worse and worse. That's why Mandami's an idiot. And people need help. It's not the people who are rent control now. It's people that aren't in rent control that need help getting your apartments. But so
Right.
you did not need as much money to live. They did not really have. There was not this professionalization of a graduate degree in teaching, which is I suppose this is how most people make a living if they're novelists today. If they're
I think
well
you're right.
known, they can get a good job. Otherwise, they can, they could teach 5 courses of freshman lit, which would be, or freshman writing, which would be terrible. No, and I don't. it's no, I used to think, there was a thing that happened to me once, and I guess in the 70s, maybe even in the 80s, but in a gay bar, just some women I didn't know, but everyone was sort of talking and what do you do? What's your, and I said I was a novelist, and, nobody really made, but then the next person said they worked for BBD&O, which was like a big ad company, and everybody went, oh! So, it taught me even back then that, novelists, we were great to each other and other, creative people, but to the average person, not so glamorous, but obviously if you want to become a writer, it would seem glamorous. And there seemed more of a, there were more big publishers, but the little publishers really hardly counted. So there was a progression, which to be in one of us, maybe 10 or so big publishers, and you would hopefully keep getting more money and more sales, and it would build up. And that was the idea back then, that you would stay with the same house and they would get invested in publicizing you and send you on tours. I mean, that happened for the first couple books for me, especially with my first novel, Some Do, but even a bit with Don Juan. No, not, yeah, for Don Juan in the Village, my third book, I was sent places.
Did you have a kind of academic track to get into publishing? A lot of people these days talk about, having to go through like an MFA program to be able to get an agent and publish with one of the big houses these days. And often that doesn't even work. But I'm curious, like, did you just know people? Like, how did you get into actually writing books rather than just writing?
Well, I did go to an MFA program, but that's not really what helped. It helped. It helped in the sense that after spending 2 years fucking around, you were really not suited for life in the real world with a regular job. But I don't know how someone recommended some new agent to me, and I went in, and I guess I brought some stories and stuff, and she kept asking if I had any ideas. And this was in, I guess, early to mid 70s. And I had thought of this crazy idea, not literary at all, but about women avenging rape on men. And her whole soul lit up. She just thought this was like the best thing ever. And she told me to go home and write, some stuff about it. So I ended up writing about 80 pages, stuff that was never really appeared in the novel. And it was focusing on stuff that really wasn't much in the novel. And so she sold that ahead of time. And the pathetic thing is, I got more money from back in the 70s, when that money, in the 70s, it was worth, pre-inflationary dollars compared to, not bringing it up. But I got more money for that book than I ever got since, or maybe all of them together practically.
This is Some Do?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
I'm sorry again, I haven't read enough of your work
It's
as
all
maybe I
right.
should have. But is the topic of that book what you just said, a woman avenging rape and so forth? Is that
Well,
what that book is
that
about?
was the prologue. Um, but actually, to get to explain how those women got to be where they were, it just became like kind of a regular novel. It was set in Berkeley, where I'd never been, and it was kind of involving the women's movement and straight people, and a married couple. And I think of it, actually, it's a really inventive book. I wish I could invent characters like that. There were scientists, there were all kinds of people. One person always wanted to adopt an autistic kid. Not that I had knew what autistic really was back then, except science, except a kid who didn't talk. But it was a comedy, because I don't think people necessarily saw it as a comedy, but in the Shakespearean sense of a comedy is where things kind of end up back where they began, and whatever happened is just kind of noise. And I do think that's kind of what happens for most political movements. If you're lucky, that's what happens with the political movement. And if you're unlucky, there's a revolution and people die, and then you end up worse than when you started.
Right.
So, these people go through, some kind of people become lesbians. There's, I don't even remember, all the complications of the story now, but apparently it's like apparently a really good read. It has more plot and normal plot. Apparently people thought I just did such a great job depicting Berkeley, where I'd never been. It just shows how, honestly, people are not that intelligent, but that's good. You have to be able to invent things.
What,
I wish I could.
Going back to, I asked this of everyone I
Yeah.
interview, and I may not know any of these influences of yours, but when you were first starting out, who influenced you? Who were you reading as a child or in high school or whatever, or even in college? Like what was like the light turned on, like I really want to do this?
Well, I think I always wanted to be a writer, or said I did, because I figured I wouldn't have to get up early in the morning and go to a job. But I never actually took a writing course till like my junior year in college. But I won the prizes at Barnard both years, and then I won some national thing, which only a few people got, a Book of the Month Club fellowship. But anyway, I just always thought I'd be a writer, but it's not like I was writing all the time, except till college. But I was reading. Well, it's going to sound so banal then, but back then people were not reading Virginia Woolf and people like that, or Henry Green, or even Forster, all those British authors of the first half, and some of the second half, Graham Greene, Muriel Spark, and also French people like Nathalie Sarraud or Rob Grier, Dura, people like that. I also read, people like Philip Roth and some when like Bartholomew and those people came along, I read them also. But
Where do you hear about Marguerite Duras or Robbe-Grillet at that time period? I mean, we're so lazy now. We have the internet and things are just sort of recommended to us, like on book TikTok or something. But where do you even find a book like that in the 60s?
I guess, well, back then we had to buy books.
Yeah. So you just
They were
stroll through the
available.
bookstore? Okay.
Yeah, they didn't have many trade paperbacks till really the 60s or the later 60s. I remember I used to have to go read books about gayness. You couldn't buy books. They didn't have trade paperbacks. They just had a few regular hardback books. And I would go read in the library because, of course, I thought that the library would report me. This is the kind of mind you might have then. I thought if I read a gay book in a library, they were going to call up my parents, my school, or the cops. So I would just sit there and read it there. This is probably really stupid thinking, but I didn't know that at the time. And there was no one I could ask because I didn't know any gay people. Or people that, I just assumed I would end up, marrying a guy. And I kept sleeping with guys until maybe the mid 70s, And in fact, at that time, if a woman slept with a lot of guys, they were probably gay and just hiding it. So you could just buy the book. You would buy the books.
Okay.
People, I don't even know if you can buy those books today. I think I've tried to get a couple things online, and you just can't even, they're not even available on. I guess secondhand bookstores would have them, but where I went to college, like at Barnard and stuff, American lit was not actually considered literature. It was like popular lit, literature was what they did in Europe, and that would include, well, I don't even, I think they would sneer at Dostoevsky too, because he was too interesting. But um, there's, oh, like Some Do was named after, there was a trilogy, no, it was a tetralogy, it wasn't called a quartet, by, oh, called Some Do Not, which was really, it was, the whole thing was called Parade's End by, oh God, this is what happens when you get old people. You either die or you forget names. But um, a really terrific, do you know who I'm talking? He wrote The Good Soldier also.
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
You know, it's really sad because he's absolutely one of the greatest writers ever. And if I had my phone here, I'd look it up. But anyway,
Well, you can tell me later, and if you come
Parade's
up
End,
with it,
yeah.
we'll put it in the
Uh,
thing. I do
but
want to
I
say
just want everyone to read it. Oh,
we have less than 3 minutes left. So
okay.
I don't know if you want to pitch anything other than these three books that I've mentioned. Is Some Do still in print right now?
No,
It's not.
no. Um, I have a weird feeling that once when I was really caught up in something, someone called and I never called back. But that may not be true because if I'm really writing something, I could sit for 12 hours straight, not even go to the bathroom because I don't want to get distracted. But
Yeah.
that doesn't happen that often. Well, I'd like someone to buy Boris the Enigma, which is about a guy they think he's dying in the hospital, and he's like, his friends are all sort of old Russians who have no money, and they come to keep him company as he's dying, and he doesn't die. He just they pull the tubes, whatever, and they end up taking care of him and living in the hospital. And it's kind of surreal, which is not my thing at all, but it's funny. It's a comedy. And I have other books too that I got sick of, oh, maybe this would be interesting for some people. I got sick of my sentences after I wrote Leash. And so I began writing I had sort of a book of long pieces that were like spoken as if someone learned English in a foreign country very, very well, but in the early part of the century, so that the sentence structure was kind of long and self-referential and endless clauses. And then in Boris, it was presumably like a Russian type accent, for which I used Yiddish because that's what I know. So
yeah, we're sorry. Well, we just had someone barge into the place. We have less than a minute left. Thank you
okay,
so much for talking with me.
well,
And I
thanks for
think this will
doing
be
this,
really fun.
Chris.
All right.
Okay, hi, bye bye.
Bye bye.